Before we get to tonight's exciting episode, I am thrilled to announce that Dan Curtis has, in fact, been voted into the Rondo Awards Monster Kid Hall of Fame. We did it, guys. We got Dan into the Hall of Fame where he belongs. At long last, Dan Curtis has entered the Rondo Awards Hall of Fame, and holy moly, I am also gobsmacked to announce that Penny Dreadful, has also been voted into the Rondo Awards Monster Kid Hall of Fame. What? How did that happen? Wow, just unbelievable. Thank you. That was entirely unexpected. Wow. I mean, now I'm glad I stole that hand from King Johnny Romano. I mean, there are always consequences with the hand of Count Petofi, but it was worth it. Thank you to everyone who voted. I am deeply honored by this, so thank you for voting for Dan Curtis and for Penny Dreadful, too. Thank you for voting me into the Hall of Fame. That's just really wild. And in the best podcast category, Terror at Collinwood once again came in second place 2 years in a row. So that's pretty cool to come in second to. Last year was Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal Podcast, and this year is Mick Garris's Post Mortem. And Mick Garris, congratulations, well deserved Rondo Award there for Best Podcast. So thank you to everybody who voted. Congratulations to all of the winners, runners-up, nominees, honorable mentions, etc. And thank you to David and Eileen Colton, who run the Rondo Awards. Just really, I am very honored and really excited. Maybe we can get Dan Curtis's daughters to accept the Rondo Award. How cool would that be? I don't know if that's going to happen, but wouldn't that be cool at the ceremony if they sent a video or something at least? How cool would that be? Anyway, I don't know if that'll happen, but it would be really cool. Anyway, thank you again, and let's get on with the show. It is a rare time of peace on the Collins estate, but soon the shadows of the past will reach into the present, bringing with them new mysteries and unseen dangers that will eventually lead to terror at Collinwood. Just a quick reminder that the Dark Shadows coloring book is now available for pre-order over at hermespress.com. They released some preview images. The coloring book is illustrated by the talented Samantha Lomusio, and I mispronounced her name last time. I apologize for that. Samantha Lomusio is the illustrator for this new retro-style Dark Shadows coloring book, which features tons of characters from every Dark Shadows storyline. So jump on over to hermespress.com and pre-order your copy today. There's nowhere to run. There's no place to hide. This podcast is fun, but there are spoilers inside. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. 'Tis I, Penny Dreadful, a.k.a. Danielle, and I am so excited today. I am so excited. I want to do the hoochie coo, the Tara Boom Die. So on with the show. You'll love it, I know, but don't worry, I'm not going to dance for you because nobody wants to see that. Trust me. I am joined by a group of Dark Shadows fandom legends. This is like the Justice League or the Avengers here of Dark Shadows fandom. You heard them back in episode 15 of Terror at Collinwood. But as Jeb Hawks might say, I wanted to hear more. I can't do a Chris Pennock impression. I bet Bob can, though. Also, we're recording this on May 1st, which happens to be the 2-year anniversary of Terror at Collinwood. So this is something of an anniversary celebration as well. Yay. And I can't think of anybody I'd rather spend this occasion with than these folks right here, because I've enjoyed spending time with them so much at Seaview Terrace over at Collinwood, and I've had some great times with them, and I'm fortunate to call them friends here. And I am joined by my guests, Nina Ogle Johnson who was a member of the Dark Shadows Festival staff. She was also the co-writer of Dark Shadows the first year, and she often attends the Seaview events. Guy Haines was the official videographer of the Dark Shadows festivals, a member of the Collinwood Players. He created popular music videos shown at the fests and at Seaview, and he helps decorate the Seaview events for Halloween and helps organize. I'm also joined by Bob Issel, who spearheads and organizes the Seaview events, who is also a member of the Collinwood Players and created all kinds of cool fan merchandise, including an amazing shirt that was scanned from the Ben Cooper Barnabas costume, which I wish I had gotten at the time because it was really sensational. He has many great stories as well about the festival's interactions with Charles Randolph Grean. He also spearheaded Our Shadowed Past, a book which collects fan memories, cast memories, crew memories, and so many other things. I mean, each one of these individuals has done so much for the Dark Shadows fan community that I could spend an entire podcast episode just listing all of the things. I just would love to hear from all of you. So welcome to the show. I'd love to hear from each of you, I guess starting with Nina and then going to Guy and Bob, about how each of you first discovered Dark Shadows, because I talked to you at Seaview, but we didn't, it was like these kind of little short discussions, but I'd like to hear a little bit. I don't think we really got into that. So how did you get into Dark Shadows in the first place?
Well, unlike you, I did not watch the Universal horror films or anything like that. I don't recall ever hearing about Dark Shadows the first year it was on. Maybe I did, but I don't remember. I happened to have the television on one afternoon. It was summer, and I'm sitting there on the I remember I was sitting on the floor doing something, and it was on, but I wasn't paying any attention to it. But it was the episode where Elizabeth was going to throw herself off Widow's Hill.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Vicky stops her. And that caught my attention. And something about Joan Bennett just captured my imagination, just really resonated with me. And I thought, oh my gosh. And that was the end of the show, toward the end of the show. And I thought, I have to watch this tomorrow. And so I looked to see what the show was, because as I say, I hadn't been paying any attention. And I thought, oh, I have to tune into this again tomorrow. And so I did. And I was totally hooked at that point, and just became absolutely obsessed with the show from there on out. I was just turning 12 that summer, and throughout junior high and high school, I don't think Dark Shadows was ever out of my mind totally. The whole rest of the run of the show, I just was so obsessed with it. But I wasn't so much into the horror part. To me, it was not scary at all. It was the costumes, the sets, the music, the chemistry between the people. It just all seemed so perfect. And like you, I've heard you say you don't see the camp in it. I didn't either. To me, I took it very seriously. I wanted to live in Collinwood and be involved in all of that stuff, because it was not scary to me. It was so alluring. And I took it seriously. I knew that it was obviously not real. I didn't believe in werewolves or vampires or anything, but I just thought it was just so perfectly done that if those things did exist, I would have been happy to be dealing with them.
Yeah. It's that intrigue, right? That pulls you in, the suspense and the intrigue. Absolutely. Yeah. How about you, Guy?
I don't know, it was something Nina just said. She said if all those things were happening, I would have been happy to be involved with them. I'm sure Mrs. Johnson would have had some chores for you then.
I'd have been happy to do it. I would have got them.
Clean up after when Adam kidnapped Carolyn, he knocked a few things over, and Mrs. Johnson probably have you clean them up. Danielle, do you mean how did I discover Dark Shadows originally, or how did I discover fandom?
We'll get to the fandom part. I'd like to hear about how you discovered Dark Shadows originally as a kid.
Okay, people are tired of hearing this, but let's say sometime in the summer of 1966, I think it was during Saturday morning cartoons or something. I was watching ABC and I saw this commercial, and it had this beautiful girl with long dark hair running from the mansion, and it said, it said something about, this is Widow's Hill, and Victoria Winters, as she stands here, will she become one of the widows who, or one of the victims who has jumped off of Widow's Hill? And tune in June 27th for Dark Shadows. So I said, wow, that looks interesting. I think I'm going to watch that. Looking back, I don't have any memory if I watched the first episode. Later, when I saw it in reruns, I think it seemed familiar to me, but it must not have grabbed me. So in August of '67, my cousin John asked me if I knew that there was a soap opera with a vampire on it. He said his name is Barnabas. I said, really? What is it? He said, Dark Shadows. I said, I'll have to check that out. So the first episode that I saw, Barnabas and Julia were in the old house drawing room, and he was ranting about Burke Devlin, how he looks. He reminds me of my Uncle Jeremiah, and I hated my Uncle Jeremiah. And he takes that the family album and tears out the picture of Jeremiah and crumbles it up. And at the time, we didn't have a color set, but Barnabas was wearing that fancy blue smoking coat or whatever he wore, and Julia had her white lab coat, and those two characters fascinated me. The opening monologue said, tonight a bargain has been made, a bargain between the living and the dead. And as soon as the commercial came on after the opening credits, I ran out here into the kitchen. This was my grandmother's house at the time. My aunt Skeets was here, and I danced around this table saying, a bargain has been made, a bargain has been made between the living and the dead. And they looked at me like I was crazy.
I love that.
That's it for that story.
I love that. Oh, and you were hooked from then on.
Yes,
You continued.
absolutely.
And you watched it all the way through to the end, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And how about you, Bob?
My earliest memories are of David exploring the West Wing. And I became enamored with the character David and thought, wow, that would be cool to explore the spooky house. So yeah, I didn't watch it in the early days in like '67 and leading up to Barnabas, but once I started watching, I believe it was probably the 1897 episodes in 1969, and I'd watch it with my mom every day. And when school was in session, I'd run home from school just like so many other kids did. And I'd say, and I'd get home like 3:05. I'd say, what I'd miss, Mom, what I'd miss. And she'd say, nothing, just, what happened yesterday. And so, yeah, those are my earliest memories of the show.
So you identified with David. A lot of people, like when the kids were central characters, I hear from so many people that David or Amy like was kind of their into the show, they're seeing it through the kids' eyes into the show. And there was such a huge kid audience for the show, and you were all kids watching it, and that was kind of, I think, unprecedented at the time, that all these kids were running home to watch a daytime soap opera basically, but it was all very different vibe from all of these other daytime shows that were on. Of course, it was just gothic.
Yeah, 3:00 in the summer. When 3:00 rolled around in the summer, I would disappear. I lived in a court, and we'd play baseball.
Yeah.
And all my friends, not many of my friends watched Dark Shadows, which was, I thought unusual because it did have a big following amongst kids. But they all knew, Bob was in the house watching Dark Shadows for a half hour. So, count me out of the game for a half hour.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Were you all, now I know, Nina, you mentioned you hadn't been into like the Universal monsters or any of that stuff. Were either one of you, Guy or Bob, into any of that stuff at that time as well? Because I know the monster craze was big at that time with Famous Monsters of Filmland and all of that stuff going around.
I bought Famous Monsters magazine and Monster World, which is a sister publication. I loved Creepy and Eerie magazines. I had no idea there was an official Dark Shadows fan club, or I would have joined it in a minute. I did find something in a magazine, a Dark Shadows fan club. It was just a little ad in like a daytime TV that was a weird thing too. I started buying daytime TV and teen magazines, and like
Yeah.
I was a little, like, oh, don't, people say, why are you buying a date? Because in those days, only, mostly female audience watched the soaps. But anyway, I got a little ad and wrote, and I, unfortunately, the fan club disbanded with my first package from them. It was just a little thing with several photos of several actors and bios, brief bios of them. But yeah, I really wish that I had no idea how to write a letter, a fan letter, where to send it.
Sure.
No one advised me, how to do that. But
Right. Nina, you said when you were in high school, I know Dark Shadows had a huge teen audience as well, in addition to kids. Were you into the teen culture as well at the time, like buying like 16 magazine and Tiger Beat and all of that?
I still have my 16s and Tiger Beats and all of those magazines that I bought in. I've still got every one of them in a box here in the closet, and they're in pretty darn good shape for how old they are. Yes, I was at the drugstore. I was, practically there before they unboxed them, trying to get them. And yeah, I was definitely into it. And I've still got them all.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's so cool. And what about you, Bob? Were you into any of the
I
pop
spent
culture?
all my money on Marvel comic books. I was a big Marvel kid, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and baseball cards. I love baseball cards. So whenever I spend my allowance on baseball cards, comic books. I did buy the Dark Shadows cards. I don't know whatever happened to those. Eventually, my mom gave my baseball card collection away to my cousin. I think he probably used that as a down payment for his house. I couldn't believe my mom gave my collection away. But, yeah, I like Guy. I had no idea there was a fan club. That it's so amazing how kids networked back then. Obviously way before the internet. And yeah, I would have loved to have been a part of that. I would have loved to have lived in New York and went to the studio.
Yeah.
That would have been cool.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I would love to have experienced that. Just to have been outside the studio. I would have loved to have been there just one time to imagine. I can imagine how exciting that must have been to be one of the studio kids.
That was nice to get, you talked about our shadowed past.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things one of the sections that was really a priority for me. There it is.
Yeah.
Our shadowed past. And I wanted a section on the Studio Days kids, and we managed to get quite a few of them to contribute. And it's just so amazing to read their memories. And I'm sure Guy and Nina are along with me. We just envy them those experiences.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm friends with, my late husband was friends with this guy, Bill Urey, who grew up in New York, and he was a studio kid. I don't think he went I think he just went a few times, but he said he took pictures of some of the actors. So I've been on him to send me those pictures. I would try to get him onto the show so he can talk about that, and I could show some of the pictures. So we'll see if that happens. But yeah, and the fan club thing, I think it must have been like the kids outside the studio, probably the epicenter in New York. It's probably was easier to find out about it. I think like word of mouth with the kids telling each other, and then these newsletters that would go out for different. And back then it seemed like it was like the actors themselves were like the focus. Like you had a Jonathan Frid fan club or a Marie Wallace fan club, etc. And then it seemed to when it went into the 70s, you started getting like more general like Dark Shadows fan zines or fan newsletters about Dark Shadows in general versus the focus being a specific actor, which is a good segue, I think, to talk about. So once Dark Shadows ended, that last episode came. I do want to ask you that, like, what was your react? Did you know Dark Shadows was going to end when that last episode aired, or did you tune in the next day to see if it was really true, or what? Anybody have any memory of that? Yeah. Oh, please elaborate, Dinah.
Bad memories. It was like a parent died. I remember I
Wow.
was so upset. I knew ahead of time it was going to go off. The last day, I was inconsolable. I was just, and for days, I'm just crying, just could not stop crying over it. And had I known all of this was going to happen to me when I was an old lady, I wouldn't have been so sad.
No,
You're
old lady.
not old. You are not old, please.
But no, if I had known all of this was going to happen, it wouldn't have been such a tragedy for me. But and I have this in our shadowed past, so this is things that most people have heard before. But the weird thing was, I kept a diary back in those days, and I wrote down everything. And a day or two, a few days after Dark Shadows went off, when I was still in the early stages of, and it really was a form of grief that I went to. It was just awful. I remember it so clearly. But I wrote in my diary, I said, I have a feeling that Dark Shadows is going to be part of my future too. And
Wow.
that just is kind of creepy, because it did turn, it's been such a huge part of my life in middle age. And I don't know what made me write that. I have no idea why I wrote that. And I don't remember writing it, but when I still have my diary. So, years ago, I discovered, I wrote that was going to be part of my future. But that was the only prophetic thought I ever had.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was very prophetic. Yeah, that definitely. Wow. How about you, Guy? Do you remember when Dark Shadows went off the air at all?
Yeah, I was aware, I'd read it in the newspaper or something, that the last air date or there would be April 2nd, 1971. And I was really down. I might have missed a few episodes in 1841 parallel time, because I just got my driver's license, and there were other things to do after school. But I remember watching that last episode, and when they carried Melanie in with the bite marks on her neck and said, if I didn't know better, I'd swear there was a vampire on the grounds of Collinwood. I said, yay, it was wrong. It was wrong. And then you hear Thayer David's voice come in there and say, this actually was an animal bite. And I thought, oh, it's true. When I said I was a little lax toward the end, I did watch it to the end, but I might have been a little lax in there. Jonathan Frid, the first ShadowCon 7, where I first saw him, he was chiding the members of the audience. He said, now, how many of you watched it to the end? And most of the hands went up, and he said, now, are you telling the truth now? He says, because your mother would, in the early days, when you first started watching and Barnabas had Maggie kidnapped, your mother would say, I need you to go to the store and get a loaf of bread. And most of it, no, I can't go, not till this show is over, but he said, toward the end, I think some of you listened to mom and left Dark Shadows to go get a loaf of bread.
My mom could have told me that the house was on fire, and I wouldn't have left the TV set. So,
how about you, Bob?
I don't, maybe I just blocked it out because it was such a bad memory, but I don't remember watching I'm sure I watched the last episode because I watched the show with my mom, but I don't remember remorse. I did miss the show, but I don't recall my remorse. I mean, because I was involved in a lot of other things, sports and whatnot. Yeah, but I did miss Dark Shadows when it went off the air.
Yeah.
I guess I'm the only one who must have needed therapy after it. So
yeah, I think it's clear that there was a lot of burnout by the end of the show in terms of like producing that on a day, not from the fans, more from the people creating the show. I think it was, it must have been a very grueling kind of thing to do that for 5 years every day. And Dan Curtis had his sight sets on Hollywood and all, making movies and things. So
we were talking about how important the stage door fans were to the show. They were also important in a way to the writers, because, and this is another story that Jonathan told at that ShadowCon, the one day they came up with a plot discrepancy, and they could not remember certain things, and the writers were like going at it, and they would ask the actors, do you remember what happened here? And someone had the bright idea, let's go down and ask the kids outside and they came up with the answer. So
Yes, yeah, yeah. And I'd love to know specifically what that plot point was. I've heard it was something in 1897, but I don't during 1897, but I don't know specifically what the plot. Do any of you know what it was?
no.
Yeah, that's it's. I wish they had kept. I don't know, like Nina kept a diary. I wish somebody like behind the scenes had kept a diary of what was going on every day.
Well,
And I'd love to hear the writers' meeting notes. Like what things did they talk about that might have been, had they
Yeah.
done storylines and things like that.
Can I say one more thing? I
Yeah.
kept a diary in 1968,
Mhm.
and I was so lazy writing in it that every day I would just write, watch DS. Two episodes in 1968 really jumped out at me.
Mhm.
April 1st, 1968, Vicky came back to the future. That I write that in my diary. And then around Thanksgiving of 68, great DS episode today. The werewolf tore out the caretaker's eyes. The Collinwood, the Collinwood Inn caretaker's eyes. It tore him out.
Yeah, poor Mr. Wells. You don't see him for a couple of years. He comes back and he gets killed by a werewolf.
Yeah.
So we mentioned fandom. So Dark Shadows ends, and then this, there was a fandom for the show while it was on, certainly with the fan clubs and all of this. But then in the 70s, Dark Shadows kind of like the undead characters in Dark, they always come back from the grave. So Dark Shadows comes back, and it always has, and I think always will, always comes back. And in this fandom emerged in the 70s. And Guy, you mentioned ShadowCon. Now that was the first kind of manifestation of a convention for Dark Shadows. There were also fanzines at around that. I had Kathy Rush in the show talk about Justice League or Avengers of Dark Shadows fandom. She certainly was a hugely instrumental figure in the Dark Shadows fandom with the world of Dark Shadows. So can you talk a little bit about how you all got involved in the fandom to begin with, how you discovered it and how you became involved in it as a participant?
I knew nothing about the fandom in the 70s. I didn't learn about it until in 1987. I first saw Jonathan Frid in Arsenic and Old Lace.
Mm-hmm.
I was so shocked to even see his name in the paper because I hadn't heard his name since Dark Shadows days. And so, of course, I went to see it. Shortly after that, at the time I was living in St. Louis, and shortly after that, he came back to St. Louis and did his one-man show. And they were going to have a reception afterward that he was going to attend. I had just started a new job. I think that was my first or second week on the job. And I went to my supervisor and I said, I have to have, even though I just started the job, I said, I have to have that Friday off. So it was actually here in Columbia where I live now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I said I was living in St. Louis, but that was an error. I mean, I was back here in Missouri, but I was here in Columbia. And so I told my new supervisor, I said, I have to have that Friday off, so that I could go in to St. Louis for the day and attend that show and everything. And she said, oh, yes, of course you can do it. And I said, thank goodness, or I would have had to quit this job. But I went to the reception and I was in line to get Jonathan's autograph. And the woman behind me, she and I started talking, and she said, well, you know about all the fandom and Shadowgram and all of that, don't you? And I said, no. She told me about it. And so I immediately wrote for Shadowgram, and then that's how I got into it and learned about it. I didn't get to a festival though until 90, I think it was 91, was my first one. And then after that, I only missed one, unfortunately.
Did you go to the East and West Coast festivals?
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing. That's great. And you became part of the convention staff, like helping to organize.
I started volunteering at my very first one, and in 97, the volunteer coordinator had not gotten well, actually I went up to ask him if I could help him with anything, and he hands me the whole stack of envelopes and he says, job's yours. And so another lady and I did it that weekend. And then after that, Jim Pearson called me and said, well, since you already did the job this past weekend, you want it permanently? And I said, sure.
That's great. And you
I
continued.
think we should save Guy the best for last. I think I should go next.
Okay.
Because Guy goes way back in fan.
Well, yeah, you went to the
like
ShadowCon.
Nina, my story kind of, well, it kind of mirrors Nina's. Once Dark Shadows went off the air, I had nothing. I knew nothing about Dark Shadows until the new Dark Shadows, the 1991 series came on.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, as I related in Our Shadow Past, I was dating a girl who had no idea what Dark Shadows was. She was younger and hadn't seen the show originally. And I got her to watch the new show with me. And one night we were at Blockbuster Video renting a movie. And she said, hey, here's that Dark Shadows you were talking about. I'm like, what? And she goes, Dark Shadows. And I walked over to where she was. And of course, it was VHS at that time. And there was the resurrection of Barnabas Collins. There was like the first 4 volumes. You know what we rented that night? That was it. You know, we rented that. We watched Dark Shadows. At the end, it said for fan club information, right to Maplewood, New Jersey. So I did. And I attended my first festival in 1991 and in LA in the spring of 91. They had 2 festivals. That was the last year they had 2 festivals. I did not go to the New York one because it was right around Thanksgiving.
It was
like
Thanksgiving
Nina,
weekend day.
Yeah, like Nina, I never missed another festival from 91 through 2016 when we had the 50th anniversary. I attended every festival and several of the peripheral events, like the Night of Dark Shadows event in 2001 in Hollywood, the 30th anniversary celebration in 96 at the La Bar Bat, and a couple other events like that. So yeah, that's how I rediscovered Dark Shadows. And because of the new Dark Shadows, which is another old Dark Shadows now.
Yeah. Isn't that wild to think about? And Guy, you mentioned you went to ShadowCon. Was it the second ShadowCon you went to?
No, I went to the 7th.
The 7th, okay.
1983.
Okay.
Yeah, they had been I'd heard, okay, here's how I got into it. In 1977, of course, Star Wars came out, and I was a huge Star Wars fan. And I'm also a little bit of an artist, and I drew a picture of Chewbacca. And I worked at the time in an art and frame shop. So I had Chewbacca framed on the wall. And this lady came in and said, I told her I'd drawn it. She said, I know where you can sell it if you want. I said, where? She said, at a Star Trek convention. I said, well, I've heard about these conventions. And so I went to this, and then I started buying Starlog magazine. And then the back of Starlog, they would list science fiction conventions. And I would always look for one local, you know. Well, here's one called ShadowCon for fans of Dark Shadows. Oh, wow. There's still fans of Dark Shadows around in 1979 or 78. Yeah. And so I sent away for the information and got flyers for Dale Clark's Inside the Old House, Kathy Retch's The World of Dark Shadows, Shadowgram that Marcy Robin put out, and subscribed to all of them. Contributed artwork to mostly to both zines, but mostly to Dale's Inside the Old House. And they would list this ShadowCon thing, and it was unheard of in my mind to be able to actually go to the West Coast for a convention. And I would say, well, Jonathan Frid's not there. The year that he's there, I'll be there. So in 1982, 2 weeks before that ShadowCon, Marcy sent out a postcard. Jonathan Frid has just agreed to join us at ShadowCon 6. And I said, I had just started a job and it was too late for me to get off. I said, if he's there next year, I'm there. And that was my first Dark Shadows convention. It was also Jim Pearson's first Dark Shadows convention. I've got people meeting Jonathan in the autograph line, and I've got Jim walking up. He'd never met Jonathan before, getting an autograph just like everybody else. So
yeah. And a lot for those who may not know who are listening, I'm sure most people do listening. There's a Jim Pearson is so he's handles all the licensing for Dan Curtis Enterprises. He worked for Dan Curtis for many years, and he started as a fan who subsequently did become officially involved as the go-to person, basically, for handling all Dark Shadow, anything to do with Dark Shadows. You got to go through Jim Pearson. Now, you all also, Nina became a member of the Dark Shadows Festival staff, but you all became involved in the fandom after that, integral parts of the fandom, like the Dark Collinsport players, and Guy, you became the videographer for the festivals. Like, can you talk about how that came about? How you became involved with that? Yeah.
Sure. Well, at that ShadowCon 7, they had afterwards they had what they call a dead dog party, and that's, I guess, you try to figure out what went right, what went wrong with the convention, and apparently there was some turmoil, and it was decided there was going to be an East Coast Dark Shadows convention. They were going to call it a Dark Shadows Festival. So I, just started attending just like everybody else. But this was 1983. I was one of the few people that had a video camera, and I videotaped that first festival and the second. And by the time I think the third rolled around, in the program book, I looked it up, and here I am listed on the staff as the video services, it said. And at the time, my friend Dave Brown, who's no longer with us, he was also one of the two official. We would both be on different sides of the room and capture, everything that went on up on the stage. So I was never asked. I just found myself listed in the program book as the Dark Shadows videographer.
I think I mentioned it when I talked with you at Seaview when we did that episode on Halloween a couple years back. But that's how I didn't get to go to the festivals until later on, until like the early 2000s or something. I went to a couple of them, but in the 80s, late 80s and into the 90s, I would experience the festivals through your tapes. I would order them. I think I got them directly from you. I'm pretty sure, because I remember your name very vividly. So I think it was the ads in the back of the fanzine. I get these VHS tapes so I could watch what the festivals were like and everything. I wish I had gone to more of them than I did. I wish I'd been more involved in it. You did a lot with the Collinsport players, with like Nancy Barrett performing, and I got a couple of videos of you guys doing the sketches, like of these and I've had Jeff Thompson on before too, who was also heavily involved with the Collinsport players. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Bob should talk about the skit with Nancy, but
yeah,
I'll just say I loved the skits. Many of them were directed by Jay Keaveney, and many were directed by Jeff Thompson. And I really wanted to be in it, but here I am behind the camera. And I know that, I think the first skit that I was in, I had like a walk on. I was Elmer Fudd hunting leviathans. Be very, very quiet. I'm hunting leviathans. And then I found that, whoever I had minding my camera, I thought, nah, I need to be behind the camera. So it was many years before I actually had significant parts in the. I love being in the skits. I love doing some on location skits that we've done at Seaview, but for the 2016 festival, Jim is so funny because in the early days I really don't think he was too keen on the skits. And then they kind of grew on Jim, I think. And so the 2016, he said, Guy, we need to have a skit at the 50th anniversary of Dark Shadows. And he said, would you direct? I said, Jim, I've got to be behind the camera. I've never directed. He said, well, what if I, get you the script? And what if I get one of the actors to be in? And I said, well, I said, who? And he said, no, I think I could get Nancy to act in. And I said, well, okay, I will be glad to direct. And with the great help of Marie McGinn, how do you pronounce Marie's last name? Mad Margaret on, you know who I mean?
Yeah.
Marie McGinney. Anyway, I apologize, Marie, if you're out there and I pronounce your name wrong, but she was very involved in theater, and she was a big help directing that also. So I'll let Bob take that skit from here.
Well, I played Barnabas.
Yes.
I had no idea he was going to be in the skit. The first several years that I went to the festival, I just sat in the audience and watched the skits and enjoyed them. And then at one point, necessity became the mother of invention. I was in California for one of the festivals, and Amanda Trujillo
Yes.
had a skit that was going on, and somebody didn't show up, so she asked if I could fill in. Long story short, there were 2 skits. I wasn't supposed to be in either one, and I ended up in both of them.
As Barnabas.
So, it was fun. I had a good time. So I appeared in a few more skits. Guy did a great job directing. And he even plays Dan Curtis.
Dan Curtis.
Yes, I love that skit too.
Yes, I've watched.
He looks like a leprechaun.
You have a golf cap on. I know you're
2016. Yeah, it was so much fun to work with Nancy.
What was that like?
She was really into it. We had a few rehearsals, and I remember picking her up in rehearsal because I had to pull her back to the table for the seance thing. I remember picking her up, and I have her in my arms, and Richie Helper's like, "Oh, put her down, you're gonna drop her." She's like, "He's fine, don't worry." I'm like, "Richie, she weighs all of 90 pounds. Don't worry, I've got her." But Nancy was a real sport, and she was a lot of fun to work with in that skit. She really was into it. I mean, she was really she had her lines down pat, and she enjoyed Guy spearheaded the rehearsals, and it really helped having some leadership and guidance in that respect. It was a great cast.
She was Carolyn. She played Carolyn in it as
Carolyn. Yeah.
Nina, were you involved in any of that in those sketches?
No, actually, as volunteer coordinator, I really missed a lot of stuff because I was working all the time. I was either sitting at the information desk, or I was running around making sure that I had volunteers at each station, or I had to wait on, like I had to get the actors food, lunches, and if they wanted something to drink, run get it. And so I had in fact, I didn't even get to see the skits because at that time on Saturday night, I would have to go up to the festival suite and get it ready for we had a little party on Saturday nights for the volunteers. And so I had to go up and get that ready and get the food up there and make sure all that was taken care of, and go around and try and invite a few of the actors to come. And so I just didn't have any time for any of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see you must have been so busy, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because Dark Shadows fandom is one of the only fandoms I've seen where the actors and the people involved with the show, cast and crew, are just mingle with the fans in such a friendly way, to the point where you should invite the actors to the party for the volunteers, and they would come, and that's wonderful. That's so cool. Yeah, it really is, and you all have great stories about people involved with Dark Shadows, both the cast and the crew, and I'd love to hear some of that. And I forget, Nina is wearing a really cool shirt, by the way. Can you talk about that shirt?
A little big for me, but a lot of people will recognize it if you look at pictures of Jonathan. It's Jonathan Frid's shirt, and he wore it a lot. Apparently, I have a lot of pictures of him in it. And the day that he put his handprint in the cement, that he was wearing this shirt that day. And I remember looking at him thinking, and it was so hot that day, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, he's wearing a dark shirt that's long sleeved. And I was dying of the heat. And I thought, how is he standing wearing that shirt? And so after he passed, his nephew brought it along with some of his other things to the festival to auction off. Yeah. And I bought his shirt.
Wow, that's so cool. That is so cool. And you got
very often, obviously.
It's for the audio listeners. It is a really cool blue, dark blue, I can't.
Baby blue, and it's an overshirt. He would wear it. Jonathan would wear it over another shirt.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk about some of your memories, each of you, of your, I guess, favorite memories from the festivals, and just favorite memories of interaction with other fans and the actors too. Like anything that jumps to mind that was particularly memorable or fun that you'd like to talk about.
Well, this is now going to become a 6-hour program.
I mean,
that's fine.
There's so many for all of us. I'm sure.
Who wants to go first? Whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead, Nina.
Maybe Guy should go because he has the most.
Oh no, no, you guys go ahead and I'll think. I'm
okay.
Bob, you want to go first?
Well, I have really good memories of Diana Malay, of Nancy Barrett, and I had sent Danielle some pictures of interacting with Diana. I was enamored with the Phoenix character, and I was enamored with Diana after I met her. Diana Malay was such an interesting person. She would say what only other people would dare to think.
Yeah.
I think Guy and Nina know that. And I actually got pretty close with Diana. I had made a portrait, a computerized portrait of the Phoenix portrait, and I presented it to her, and I think it was either 1995 or 96, I don't recall now, at Lyndhurst. And she really liked it. She wrote me a really nice thank you note on Egyptian papyrus, I guess it was.
Wow, that's so cool.
And then the following year, I made her a mouse pad of the Phoenix portrait, and I gave that to her at that 1996 30th anniversary party we had at the La Barbat in New York City. And again, she wrote me a really nice thank you note. She was really a very sweet lady, and I enjoyed spending time with her at the festivals. Nancy Barrett too. Nancy was great. I had sent Nancy, somehow I'd gotten her address, and I had sent her a bunch of movie posters from Night of Dark Shadows, foreign movie posters. And I think that was 1995. And I never heard back from her. So I just assumed she probably got them and threw them away. Well, fast forward to 1997, she had become friends with Craig through Louis, when Craig was doing Louis' biography, Big Lou.
Craig Hamrick, yeah.
Craig Hamrick, right. Yeah, I should have mentioned Craig Hamrick's last name, right. So Craig got Nancy to come to the festival, and that was a real big deal because she'd never been to a Dark Shadows festival. So, and I think Nina, well, that was the biggest festival we ever had.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was 97 at the Marriott Marquis. It was a huge group. And the really cool part was that the room that I stayed in, Nancy used as her green room. So we had Nancy in our room. Craig had mentioned to her, that he had mentioned me to her, and he had mentioned that I had sent her some stuff, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I still have all that stuff." So she actually brought it to New York.
Wow.
And I sent Danielle some pictures too of that. And Nancy signed all these posters for me, and she put on at that time I had designed an 1897 t-shirt, and she put that on. And it was so much fun hanging out with Nancy. I was the only one allowed to videotape her performance, and they gave me a spot right up front. And I'll never forget that festival. It was so much fun. It was so cool to just interact with Nancy and be part of her entourage.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Wow. Yeah. Nina?
Well, one of my favorite memories, actually, I had so many from the festivals, I can't even begin to name half of them. But one of my favorites was actually from one of Jonathan Frid's one-man shows. I ended up, after he moved back to Canada, I and a few other fans got to be part of his volunteer staff, because when he would come back to the United States to do his one-man shows after he moved to Canada, because of the tax situation between Canada and the US, he didn't want to get involved in taking money, so he donated all the money to charity. So Nancy Kersey, who was working with Jonathan at the time, recruited a few of us to help with things at the show, like selling tickets or selling merchandise, or we would help in the autograph line. Like, I would take pictures of each person that wanted their picture with Jonathan. So as a reward, he would invite us to his rehearsals. And so after one of these rehearsals, he was going to go out to dinner with us. And the restaurant was not quite ready for us, for our group. Actually, the restaurant was going to be closed that night. It was tied in with the bed and breakfast where he was staying. And so the restaurant was closed, but the owner who ran the bed and breakfast where he was going to open it for us to go and eat. And they weren't ready for us. So Jonathan went up to his room and he came back down with a bottle of vodka and he said, "Who wants to have a drink with me?" And I was stunned because every single other person in the room left and went into the living area or some kind of reception room. And I'm the only one standing there. And I said, "Well, I will." So he and I went in the kitchen and he poured, first time I ever drank vodka straight. And but that we didn't have anything to mix it with. But so he poured me a vodka and poured himself a vodka. And we stood there leaning against the sink, chatting about movies and whatever.
Wow.
And I could not believe my great good fortune to be the only one that said, "I'll have a drink with you."
Wow.
Wow, that's really cool.
that everyone else just didn't seem to want to do that. And I just couldn't believe it. But it was a wonderful memory. Wonderful.
That's great. Wow. And Guy, speaking of Jonathan, I know you have a story about Jonathan. Well, hello there, Guy Haines. When he saw you, I know you wrote about that a while back too in Scary Monsters.
It got to the point wherever he would see me, he goes, "Well, hello there, Guy Haines." One of the last times he said that to me, I had just walked into this dark auditorium and he was in there rehearsing and he was up front and I must have come in way in the back. And I heard this voice, "Hello there, Guy Haines." I've jotted down a few stories that are short, and you interrupt me if I go too much. But I mean I could talk about. I figured I think for a future cast I'll talk about my trip to Newport with Jonathan. But
yes, yeah.
At one of the festivals. In New York, probably at the Vista Hotel before the first bomb in the World Trade Center went off and caused it to become a Marriott. I was rooming with Helen Samaras and her sister. Her sister was ill at the time, and they put us on the same floor that they put the actors on. You know, this was a no floor for fans, for Dark Shadows fans. They were not supposed to be on that floor. But because Helen had a friend that worked for the Vista and she put us on that floor, we were on the same floor as Laura Parker and Jonathan Frid. And so I walked by this room on my way to the elevator at one point, and I heard these voices, a man and woman's voice coming from behind this door. And they were chanting something like the bells. And I said, I think Helen was with me. I said, "Oh my gosh, Helen, do you think they're real Satan worshipers here at the festival?" She said, I don't know. Well, later we found out that Jonathan and Laura were doing a recitation of, I think it's Edgar Allan Poe, The Bells.
The bells, yeah.
The bells. And we were in there rehearsing. So that was funny. There was another festival where Louis Edmond was supposed to be there, and he was, you know, and everybody was anticipating. He had been at least one prior festival, so everybody was looking forward to seeing him, and he never showed up. And it turns out the festival sent a limousine to pick him up. But Louis has a place in New York City, and he had a place out on Long Island. And the poor limo driver drove way out on Long Island to pick him up, where he was waiting in New York. So unfortunately, he didn't make that festival. There was another festival. It might have been Joan Bennett's first, which I think was 85. We were all seated in anticipation of Joan Bennett. And there were some chairs that were roped off toward the front where there was a fan sitting there. And one of the volunteers asked him to move, and he wouldn't move. And then they got a little loud. And finally, this overzealous volunteer just grabbed the guy and wrestled him away. And the crowd, everybody started looking, oh my, what's going on? What's going on? And don't you know, it was like a wave that crossed the audience. So there was all of a sudden a rumor started. Someone was there to assassinate Joan Bennett.
Oh my God.
It's silly if you think of it, but it's like, yeah, oh my God, the guy had a gun and he was going to shoot Joan Bennett.
Yikes, that's scary. Wow.
These were things, I'm telling things that people might not have heard.
I've never heard that one. That's wild. Wow.
One time, this was like probably in the 2000s. It was by the time the pre-Barnabas episodes came out, and I loved the single episode with Love Lady Powell played.
Oh, she's great. Yeah.
Portia Fitzsimmons. She's an art dealer, and she wanted to buy Sam Evans paintings. And I just loved her. And so I did a little research and I found her phone number and I gave her a call. And I said, you know, I'm a fan of yours. And she said, well, what do you like that I've done? I said, well, I'm so sorry. The only thing that I know of is your Dark Shadows episode. And she goes, really? She seemed like a real nice lady. And I invited, I said, I'm on the festival staff. I said, we would love for you if you ever want to join us at a festival. And so I wound up, I think those were the days of VHS, and I sent her a VHS copy of her episode, but that was nice talking to her. And finally, I just wanted to say, you were talking about Diana, how kind she was, but she was very frank with people. She would tell them what she thought. A lot of people took it the wrong way, but that was just her manner. I remember before I knew her well, I was waiting. She was signing autographs, and she was signing beside Cy Thomasoff, the set designer. And I was just waiting for people to get out of the way so I could get a good shot of him. And she saw me standing there with my camera, and she looked at me and she said, finally, aren't you ever going to take your picture? I'm waiting. And so I had to take it of her. I didn't have the heart to tell her I wanted to take it aside Thomas. But that's enough of my little, those are
those are great.
Those are great stories. And Bob, I know you also had a really great experience with Charles Randolph Grean. You want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, well, like most Dark Shadows fans in the 1990s, I was a big collector of merchandise, and back then, Guy could tell you the prices of stuff were through the roof. Like an Ode Angelique 45 record was $200 if you could find one. Photocopies of Ode Angelique sheet music were like $60, $70 just for a photocopy, because it was stuff was very scarce. Well, again, somehow I'd gotten Mr. Grean's phone number, and I called him because I knew he had produced the Josette's Music Box 45 RPM record. And he was really nice. At the time, his wife was a producer in New York City for ABC, and they had a son that was autistic. And long story short, I told Charlie that we were going to be out there. This was in 1996, the same time that I was out there for the LeVar Bat 30th anniversary celebration. And so he lived in Weston, Connecticut, which is right over by Lockwood Matthews Mansion, 5 minutes away. And he said, well, come on over. So, so after the event at the LeVar Bat, we drove to Terrytown. We spent the night in Terrytown, and we went to Lyndhurst first before we went to Charlie's, which ended up being quite a ordeal because we went in search of the old house. And if anybody that hasn't been back there, it's very dense and overgrown back where the old house was. Spratt Mansion burned down in 1970, Guy, 69 or 70. 69. So we're back there, and we actually find the foundation area for the what do you call that thing?
Fountain?
The fountain. I think it was the Fountain Foundation that we found. Anyway, long story short, I step on a nail.
Oof.
and it was a rusty nail, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a tetanus shot. So we were off to the hospital in Terrytown. So one of the guys that was with us, I gave him Charlie's number. I said, could you call him and just tell him we're going to be late, you know? So he did, and we went to the hospital. When we got to Charlie's, he was in a driveway, and he had his hands behind his back. He was just standing there as we walked up, and as soon as we walked up, he took his hands from behind his back, and he had records in his hand. And he handed each of us a Josette's Music Box 45 record.
Wow, that's so
crazy.
Nice.
I mean, because these records were so scarce.
Yeah.
And then he invited us into his house, and we had a nice visit with him. He showed us his scrapbook. He had played for, at that time, 6 or 7 sitting presidents.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was a very good friends with Diana Shore, and had a lot of pictures with Diana Shore. But yeah, so it went so well that he ended up coming to, at the time there was, what was the Collins Association?
Collins Association, yeah.
Yeah, Collins Association had a Halloween party at Lockwood Matthews, and Charlie came to the Halloween party, which was really cool.
That's great.
And he spoke to everybody, and yeah, I mean, it was a great experience. I mean,
yeah.
I remember sitting in his living room, and one of my friends, Rick, said, Mr. Grean, I've been looking for this Star Trek record for years. Would you happen to know it? Because he had produced it. And I swear to God, Charlie goes over to his closet, pulls out a brown box, goes like this, boom, 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 pulls the record out, and he gives it to my friend Rick.
Wow.
And Rick was like,
That's
he was stunned.
Wow.
So yeah, it was such a great visit. And he showed us pictures of his boat. And he goes, with my profits from Quentin's theme, Shadows of the Night, I bought this boat. So it was, it was a really, really cool experience.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Very cool. And we mentioned Dark Shadows merchandise, and you, Bob, have kind of filled the niche there a lot, because there's sometimes, there have been things that were not made for Dark Shadows, and you did like small runs of certain items that were just really cool for the fans. Can you talk a little bit about some of those? Like I mentioned the t-shirt at the top of the show from the scanned Ben Cooper costume, which is incredible that you even had the Ben Cooper costume. That is
that was a great story.
Yeah.
That was a great story too, because one of my friends local here in Illinois wrote an article about my Dark Shadows collection, complete with pictures and my name and everything. And one night I get home, and there's this message on my answer machine that said, "Hi Bob, my name's such and such. I saw your article in the Elgin Courier. I have a Barnabas Collins costume, and I was wondering if you'd be interested." And there was a phone number, and I'm like, I was thinking, wow, someone's pranking me, because the Barnabas Collins costume does not exist. I mean, there's one or two at that time. Again, this was in the 1990s, mid 1990s. I only knew of one person that owned it at that time. Well, I called back the number, and the woman I kept saying, "Who is this?" She was saying her name. I'm like, "No, who is this really? Who put you up to this?" And she's like, "I'm serious, So I ended up going 15 minutes from my house.
No way! Wow.
House. And I get there, and she goes into her closet, and she pulls out the box, the Barnabas Halloween costume, and it was just amazing. I don't remember what I paid for it. I want to say it was like $600 or $700,
which is a steal compared to what it would go for. Because I know Jeff sold his, and he talked about went for
right.
For
and eventually, I sold mine, but before I sold mine, I had a silkscreen made of the design, and as you know, I had t-shirts made of that. And I also had an adult apron costume made for myself. And I actually wore that at the Halloween party that Charlie came to in 1996 at Lockwood Matthews. But then I also had a mold made of the mask. And I actually had rubber masks made. So
wow. Oh, that's so cool.
Mask.
Oh, wow.
And the guy that made these masks did such a great job painting them. They were identical to the original plastic mask.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about this is it's rubber, so it wasn't going to break, So I had, a handful of these made up too. And we had fun with them at festivals. One time Dean Wilson, myself, and another friend, we Rich Blanco, we did a To Tell the Truth, where each of them had a mask on, and my name is Barnabas Collins. My name is Barnabas Collins. With the real Barnabas Collins, please stand up. You know, we did a whole bunch of questions. I am seated as Nicholas Blair. We have it on videos.
That's great.
It was so much fun. That's another thing. You know, Guy is so good about. We have so many videos that we made, like at Lyndhurst, and there's no better Sam Evans than Guy Haines.
Yeah, when I met Charles Randolph Grean, I was dressed as Sam Evans. And he's looking in the picture, he's looking at me like, what is this?
Isn't there a video of you in front of the Evans Cottage in Essex, Connecticut, going, all right, Maggie, I'm going to the Blue Whale?
Yeah, thanks to Bob, we made friends with the people that lived there, and they let me come in and change into my Sam Evans outfit in their house.
And Mrs. Campbell was even the voice of Maggie Evans.
Yeah, yeah. I was saying, okay, Maggie, I'll see you, darling. And she goes, okay, Pop.
Oh, that's great.
You know, and you know, Guy's followed up a lot with that, and myself too. We've become very good friends with Mrs. Campbell. And, you know, Guy has stopped by whenever he's in Essex, and myself, and she always enjoys seeing us, which is really nice, because we always bring new people by. And
several years ago, thanks to Nina, we were able to introduce Kathryn to her house.
Kathryn Leigh Scott,
Kathryn Leigh Scott. Maggie Evans came home to her cottage for the first time.
What was that like? That must have been really fun.
Yeah, Nina, you want to talk about that?
Well, it was so funny, because how it came about was Bob invited her to join during COVID, we had Zoom chats of, you know, the Seaview people and a few others. And so Bob decided to invite Kathryn to one of our Zoom chats, and she got on. And at the end, Bob opened it up to questions. And I don't know what made me think of this, but I said, oh, I've got a question. I said, have you ever been to Essex to see the Evans Cottage and the coffee shop where Maggie worked and all of this? And she says, no, what is it? Where is it? And she had no clue. And so we told her, and then we left it. I said, well, we should get you there sometime. And it was just kind of one of those things that you say, and you don't think it's ever really going to happen. And then I had occasion to exchange an email with her a few months later. And at the end of it, I said, oh, we really need to get you to Essex, Connecticut sometime to see those places. And again, didn't think anything would come of it. And about 5 minutes later, I get an email back from her, and she says, how about June 27th, the anniversary?
Wow.
I nearly fell off my sofa. And so she said, well, can you help kind of organize it and all that? We had to keep it small because the Griswold Inn, which was, of course, the coffee shop, they were having some events there that weekend, and they said we can't accommodate very many people. And we knew that the ones that we wanted Kathryn to stay there, and I wanted to stay there, and a few others really wanted to be in that building. So we kept it a very small group, but she came down with her boyfriend, and we had the whole weekend there, and she got to stay in the Collinsport Inn and go to her coffee shop, which is actually more of a bar restaurant. And we took her to the Evans Cottage. And the really weird thing was she and her boyfriend got into my rental car with me. So I'm driving Maggie Evans, Kathryn Leigh Scott to the Evans Cottage. And I thought, this is just,
surreal.
It was a goosebumpy moment, you know?
Yeah.
And it was really fun. And we had a great time. We just, and then that spurred her to get interested in coming up to Seaview. And so she came that October. So it was just a fun, you know, it all came out of just, you know, casual conversation. And all of a sudden she was like, yeah, I'll go. And it happened. And she said, since it's the anniversary of the first airing of the show, June 27, we got a big sheet cake, you know, anniversary cake for the show. And she cut it. After we went out to the Griswold Inn to have dinner, we went to a little park across the street where they had an ice cream shop, and we had the cake and ice cream, and she cut the cake for everybody for a really nice little mini event, you know.
I love that. Oh, thanks for sharing that. That's so cool.
Bob, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about when she came and stayed at Seaview.
Yeah, I want to talk about Seaview. I would love to hear about how Seaview
Well, yeah,
happened
well,
and how actors staying there. That's wild. Yeah.
we have a room that we call Josette's room, and Guy had the great idea of, well, I got I got to give Nina props because Nina helped really get the room fixed up nice.
It's beautiful.
We
Yeah.
have a Josette's portrait that Cindy Merritt Yates painted years ago, and it's really a beautiful portrait. And we put the portrait in the room. And then, Guy, why don't you go ahead and?
Well, we got jasmine soap and jasmine perfume.
Yay.
And what I thought Bob might say was I think we were just going to put her and her boyfriend up in a hotel, and she said, no, I want to stay in the house. So you can't keep up with her. I tell you what, I mean, she's all over the place. But when I videotaped her going up the steps, and I got to the room before she got there, and it just occurred to me, I'm David. I wish I had more time because it kind of sounds dumb, but I'm in the room and I'm looking at with the camera on the portrait, and it's Josette. Josette, it's David. I'm frightened, David. Josette, please come help me. And then I went over to the door, and in walks Kathryn Leigh Scott.
I mean, how cool is that?
I love it.
You know,
I love that.
And behind the cottage, the Evans Cottage, where the Campbells live, there's a graveyard, and there's several gravestones with someone named Barnabas.
Yeah.
Almost virtually behind the Evans Cottage.
Right. Which maybe that was maybe that was the gravestone that Bob Costello claims he saw the name on. And she no longer lives there, but Alexandra Moltke used to live right near the Evans Cottage. She didn't even realize that was the house, right?
Yeah, we can tell that
next door.
Bob called me a few years ago. He says, Guy, I've got to tell somebody. I've got to, and I said, what? He said, you can't, you got to swear you won't tell anybody. He says, Alexandra Isles lives right next door to the Evans Cottage. And I said, what? And he was able, her husband had passed away, and he was able to figure out where she lived. And then she no longer lives there. So anybody out there, don't think you're gonna, but
she's very private. So she was
very private. No one, please don't bother her. But when we after she moved, Mrs. Campbell said to us, she said, I was sworn to secrecy. She said she knew you guys came up here to see the Evans Cottage, and so I was never able to tell you. She's right next door.
Vicky moved in next door to Maggie. It's great.
Well, Alexandra was very, very gracious in signing several photos for me for my raffles that we have up at Seaview Terrace.
I won one of them, so I was excited to get one.
Yeah. So I had been in touch with her, so I thought it only fair that whenever we were going to be in town, I would email her and say I'd let her know when we were going to be in town, so she wouldn't be caught like at the Griswold or the post office, and all of a sudden all of us are there.
Yeah, and the post office is the Collinsport police station. I don't think I mentioned this yet. When I was down there in October. We went down in October, and it was on Halloween, and it was the streets were decorated, and in front of the post office where Sheriff Patterson once worked, there was a Barnabas. Remember, that was like a Barnabas decoration on the phone pole. Scarecrow. Yeah. That's right, Barnabas Scarecrow. Yeah.
I think the town has a contest every year of people creating scarecrows, and they put them on the street posts.
Yeah. And right in front of the Collinsport police station, there was a Barnabas. So somebody knew what.
You'll have to show a picture of that, Danielle. I know you have a picture.
I did take a picture. Yeah, I'll have to put a picture on the video version. We did the Seaview episode where I talked to the three of you and several other folks there at Seaview, and I'd love if you could talk a little bit about that. This is actually a private residence. It's a mansion. It is a mansion, right. But there are only a certain number of people that can stay there every year, but you have an arrangement with the Carey family to do this. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, gosh, that dates all the way back to 1993. My first visit, Guy and Helen took me up to Seaview they were doing some Collinsport player filming on the terrace along with a few other fans, and they were in costume. And in one scene, Guy was actually out on the lawn, and I was standing next to him, and he's filming, and he says, there comes Mrs. Carey, because he had seen pictures of her. And Mrs. Carey came up, and she asked us if we were at the college, and we said no. And she asked us if we had permission to be on the grounds. This was in the summer of 1993. And so there were kids there for summer school, and there were people milling about the property. And we're like, no, we don't have permission. She goes, well, I'm going to have to ask you, I'm Mrs. Carey, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And then Guy, I always say, Guy chimed up in that cherub voice of his. Oh, well, we really love your house. And, I'm from Maryland. He mentioned we just come from a Dark Shadows Festival in New York. Bob's from Illinois. And, and he mentioned where we were all from. And in the span of 5 minutes, we went from being kicked off the property to being given a tour of the house by Mrs. Carey. With a brief stopover by the tennis courts where there was a worker painting the fence. And I'm like, I wonder why we're walking over here. Well, the worker was Mr. Carey. And I immediately became enamored with Mr. Carey. I'm like, here's a guy that's hands-on. He's painting the fence himself, instead of having some kid paint the fence, he's up there painting the fence. So the Careys were going back to New York that day. We helped them load up their car, and Salve Regina's security was on site, but we have Mrs. Carey saying, bye, take care of my house. and they left, and they left us at the house, which was pretty cool. We hung out at the house for a while. But prior to her leaving, we exchanged information. And then 2 years later, in 1995, I contacted her and said we were bringing a group up after the festival at the Marriott Marquis. And she said, well, we'll be here. And I think there was somewhere between 13 to 15 of us. And she gave us a tour of the house, which we have on videotape, thanks to Dean Wilson. Rest in peace, Dean. Dean had the big video camera. So Dean, myself, and Rich Blanco took turns holding the video camera as Mrs. Carey walked us around the house. And then between 1995 and 2009, whenever I wanted to bring a group up to the house, Mrs. Carey had arranged with Salve's security to allow us to be on the property. Mm-hmm. If not in the house, we were at least allowed to be on the property. It would all depend year to year on what was going on with the kids in the house. And then when the Carey family ended their relationship with Salve in 2009, we started having some fan gatherings in the house, and we've been having them ever since.
Yeah,
so,
and you've all been, and I know Nina and Guy, you've been to almost all of them, if not all of them, right?
Yeah,
I'm the only one besides Bob that's been to all of them.
Wow.
Yes, okay. Nina's been all of them. Guy had to miss one with kidney stones. I remember that.
Yeah.
But they're both integral parts of what goes on there. Guy's decorating is second to none. I mean, and he has some, Marge Hicks and Ruth Mather are big helpers. Helen.
I that's what I want. That's the most fun for me, is showing first timers the house decorated. Like, I just love seeing their, looking at the house inside and out. So
yeah.
Do you have a video on YouTube of you walking around the house decorated, or no?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have several.
There's one with the werewolf animatronic and you yell at Jennings or something.
Yeah, and I have to say, a while ago, Nina was saying that she didn't get involved in the skits, but she did do a skit for me as Elizabeth inside the house, and she looked gorgeous. She looked like Elizabeth Collins Stoddard. That's on YouTube also. I'll send you a link if you want.
I want to see that. You would be a great Elizabeth. I would love to see that. That's awesome.
You should list Guy's YouTube channel for
I will.
Don't know him, because he's got so much incredible stuff.
And
Under-
I'm so lax because there's a lot of stuff I don't put up. I get discouraged with YouTube and Facebook because I've tried to upload my music videos and they take them, they just take the music away saying it's copyright infringement. But I hear there's a way around that. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I'm going to work on that. But
yeah, I'll definitely put a link in the show notes to your YouTube channel, which I've been subscribed to for a while, and you have some fantastic videos on
it's
there.
all great stuff.
Yeah, it
you.
really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get goosebumps thinking about it, because when you see that house for the first time, it's a surreal experience. And for me, it's never gotten old. Every time I go up to Newport, I always make it a point to walk down towards the edge of the property and at some point turn around and have that classic view of the house. And it always gives me goosebumps. It's always like, I always have to pinch myself. Am I really here?
That never gets
Because
old.
who would
It's
have ever
true.
thought,
Yeah.
none of us would have ever thought back in 1967, 66, that we would ever see Seaview Terrace, Collinwood, much less be allowed inside, and then to be able to have events there. You know, and you know, I've got a dedication page in our Shadowed Past to Mr. Carey. And, you know, if it wasn't for Mr. and Mrs. Carey and their daughter, Denise, they make this all possible. I mean, they are just so gracious, so down to earth, and they really care about us, and we really care about them. Our first party, Mr. Carey said, "You guys bring a warmth that has been missing, a warmth and a life that's been missing from this house."
Yeah.
Love.
And,
Love.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and we do, because everybody's got a passion for that house. Normally how new people come to the house is there, and I was talking to Guy about this the other night, is they're referred to by somebody already coming. I just can't accept anybody off the streets that I don't know.
Sure. This is a private
usually
residence for those
It's a
listening.
private residence, right?
Yeah.
So usually, like if Guy says, "Hey, Bob, this person's interested in coming, can you add them to their email, to the email list?" Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you know, because it's Guy, you know, or it's Nina, if they say, "Hey, you know, such and such," but I just can't take random people that I don't know,
because you
it
don't
is a
know
private
who's gonna.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know, Guy or Bob, if you want to touch on some of the work that, I mean, it doesn't compare to the work being done now, but minor things that like Patrick de Blasi and the staircase, and you know how that was improved, you know, little projects that I don't know if you want to
Well, yeah,
touch
I mean, yeah, we could talk about, you know, like the metal gates, how, you know, Nina's gates, how we sanded the gates and they repainted them, and the
Wow.
staircase, we got some of the etchings out of the staircase.
For anybody who doesn't know it out there, there's a portrait of Barnabas that hangs there year round. It's hung there since 2009. It was not taken down when Denise Carey got married, and it was there for her reception.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I saw that when I was in there.
Mr. Carey's mother was a Collins.
No kidding, really?
Is that true, Bob? Did I get that
Yes.
right?
Yeah. I do want to bring up one thing. Bob sent me some great pictures of Louis Edmonds, and everyone I talk to has nothing but nice things to say about Louis Edmonds. He seemed like such a genuinely fun person to be around, and a nice, kind, just stories of kindness, a very genuinely kind person. I know Helen Samaras, who helps out a lot at the Seaview, she cooks so much at those events. Like she's cooking in the kitchen and she does so much, but she was very close with Louis Edmonds. But do you have some Louis Edmonds stories to share? Or would you like to share any?
I mean, I have a couple Louis stories, but you know, Guy actually lived with Louis for 6 weeks, wasn't it? Guy, was it 6 weeks?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Let me go first while they're still fresh in my mind, because otherwise I'll forget. But this is Louis. Louis was such a trooper. Okay, we talked earlier about some of the Collins Association program Halloween parties, and there was one party that Louis came to where that morning he had rolled out of bed and he hit his head, and he came to the party anyway, and he had this huge bruise and redness on his forehead. This was 1999. I remember because I was dressed as Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I had my lightsaber, and I had it pointed at Louis' head and he played around. He played with it like, oh, he played off of it. And another story about Louis at another gathering at Lyndhurst, he had worn a kilt to Lyndhurst, and I'm in the men's washroom at the urinal, taking care of my business. Louis comes in next to me and just lifts his kilt and starts to urinate. And he goes, "Ah, freedom!" Like, Louis. But Guy will tell you that's how Louis was just so much fun. I'm actually going to introduce Guy into this part of this segment because in 1998, Guy was supposed to go to Newport with us, but Louis was in need of a nurse, and he knew Guy was a nurse, so he got a hold of Guy, and where Guy worked, they gave him a leave of absence to go take care of Louis. Well, when Louis found out from Guy that Guy had originally was going on this trip with us, he says, "Oh, you have to have your friends come to the house." So we were all invited to Louis's house, and Louis has a pair of shutters from the old house that burned down. And he tells the story that he was out there for something or another, and he saw these shutters, and he said, "Oh, I simply have to have them." And he had somebody put them in their pickup truck and transport them back to Long Island. And now they're hanging on his house. And he says, and Bob Costello calls it dark shutters.
and he signed his guest book, The Dark Shutters.
Dark Shutters, yeah. And I sent you some pictures of those that maybe you could share. But I'm going to let Guy take over.
Did Nina have anything she wanted to say about Louis?
I don't really have that many interactions with him. There was one time I was sitting next to him. I was watching Diana Malay's table for her, and he was sitting next to her. And so when I sat down to watch her table, he asked me my name, and he made up a little song right on the spot and sang it to me. And I would kill to have a video of that, because I don't remember what the words were or anything, but he put my name into this song. Song. It was so sweet, and I wish that would have been recorded, but it was a nice, even though I don't remember the words or anything, it's a very nice memory that I have of him.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to make this quick, because I tell you what, it's sometime if I come back, I'll do the whole show about Louis, because I stayed with him for 3 weeks, and I kept the video diary every night. At least 15 minutes a night, talking about the events of the day. And sometimes they got a little bit naughty. So, and I thought, Bob, I thought I was the only one that had a Dark Shadows actor urinating story, but I don't know if anybody read my article, maybe I didn't even put it in my article about driving up to Newport the first time with Jonathan Frid, and Ann Wilson was driving us, and Jonathan kept saying, "Ann, how about a pit stop?" And she kept driving and Ann, I need that pit stop soon. And I'm not going to, but with Louis had respiratory problem. Well, he had developed throat cancer, I think, in 1991. He had an operation. He had trouble swallowing, and he had aspirated sometime in 97, got an aspiration pneumonia, got out of the hospital at that time. His brother Ramey called me and asked if I could come up and be his nurse. And at that time I couldn't, but then he went back into the hospital another time, and he got out, and they said, "We really do need a nurse." And so I was able to get off my job for 3 weeks and go and be Louis's nurse. And that was quite an experience. It was a lot of fun. The man was wonderful, funny, naughty, genuine, considerate. He had me not only doing nursing things, but we went out, he needed manure for his garden, so we went out to this horse farm and shoveled manure.
Oh jeez. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Then when the last day that I left, he had gotten a new nurse, And I was going around before I left videotaping the rookery, which is what he called his home on Long Island. And here he's showing this new nurse how to shovel and garden.
Yeah. Oh my.
So
wow.
I remember him. Wasn't his name Robert? Was it Robert?
No, he was Hispanic. Julio, I believe, was his name.
Oh.
Yeah,
No,
but yeah, I've got a million stories.
Yeah,
but the one nice thing was I arrived in the middle of the night because I worked till 11:30 here in Maryland, and then I drove to New York. And he told me, he said, "No, Guy, I'm in the city at my place in the city. I'll be out tomorrow afternoon. You go into the guest house." He had a beautiful guest house. "And you sleep there, and I'll wake you up when I get to the rookery tomorrow afternoon." So I slept so well. And the next thing I know, it was daylight, and the rookery had these, they weren't shutters, but they were like boards that covered the windows, and the windows were screened. There was no air conditioning, just a beautiful breeze came in, and Louis was, here I am, Uncle Roger is waking me up. It's like
wow. Now you also went to Joan Bennett's house and had her as Elizabeth. Say,
yeah,
yes, Victoria Winters is my daughter.
My friends Chris Noakes and Walt Miller set up a visit with Joan, and when Jim Pearson found out about it, he asked me if I could videotape Joan doing a greeting for this was 1986 for the Dallas Dark Shadows convention. And so I did that. When she answered the door, she said, she answered the door herself, even though she had a maid working. She said, "Can I help you?" And we said, "Well, Miss Bennett, we're, you said we could come by today." She said, "I did." She said, "Excuse me just a minute. I need to go check my schedule book." And so she came back a few minutes later. She says, "I'm terribly sorry. Yes, it slipped my mind. Please come in." So she had us waiting in her living room. She said, "Please excuse me. I want to slip into something nicer." And so she came out with this beautiful, bright saffron yellow blouse that I said, "You look so good in yellow." And and her husband, David Wild, at the time, he was in the backyard. Only had a pair of shorts and sandals on, and he was doing landscaping. He was putting in a little fountain that trickled down, and Joan decided that we could videotape out there in her backyard with these ferns and plants behind her, and my friend Chris was doing the interview and asking her questions. And every once in a while, bang, 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 her husband was banging with the hammer, and she said, "David, we're doing an interview here." And he said, "How the hell do you think I'm going to get this?" And I thought, oh my gosh, he hates us. He hates us being here. And so finally, when we were done, he came over. He was the nicest man. He showed us all around the house and everything. But it occurred to us the night before that maybe we could get her to finally once and for all settle if Elizabeth was Victoria Winters' real mother. So I had some lines written down, just not two, maybe 2-3 lines. And she said, "Okay, I'll do it." And she put her glasses on and lit up a cigarette and was studying her line. And then finally says, "I think I'm ready." "Okay, I'm ready." And so she said her lines, but she didn't say them as they were written. But what she said came out better than what we had written. She said, as speaking as Elizabeth, I have she said, "I have a message from my Dark Shadows fans. Speaking as Elizabeth, indeed, Victoria Winters was my daughter." And we just went wild when she said that. It was just so wonderful. And the fans in Dallas really loved hearing that. So.
Yeah. I just had a fan on talking about Victoria Winters because she prefers the Art Wallace Shadows on the Wall, the original plan that Vicky was going to be Paul Stoddard's daughter. But I think when Alexandra came in and auditioned, she resembled Joan. She bore some resemblance to Joan Bennett, and they switched gears, and the writers were going to have her be Liz's daughter. Is that, I think that's kind of the majority, I think, of Dark Shadows fans go
I don't want to.
prefer. I don't know.
I don't want to dash anybody's hopes or anything, but I'd always wanted to believe that and I had heard that too, that once they saw the resemblance between Alexandra and Joan Bennett, that they decided. And I do know that at the first festival, the first East Coast festival, Ron Sproat was the only guest, and we asked, and he said yes, it was eventually going to be revealed that Elizabeth was Victoria's mother. That so maybe not in the very beginning, but it had evolved to that. So
I've talked to Guy about this before, and I'd be all fine and good with that if it wasn't for the Betty Hanscom portrait. Because I mean, Betty Hanscom was Victoria Winters.
Unless her father.
Remember when? What's that?
Her father, Hanscom, the butler.
He could have been.
He could have been the father, and she could.
So my theory is that Jameson Collins had an affair.
Yes.
With Betty Hanscom, and the offspring was Victoria Winters.
That would still keep her a Collins.
That would keep her a Collins and would make her Liz's half sister.
Yeah.
How else do you explain the portrait is of her? I mean, you remember she walks in the drawing room with the portrait, and Roger and Elizabeth are like, we don't see any resemblance. And Carolyn says, "Oh, Vicky, who painted the portrait of you?"
Yeah. Well, if Hanscom, the butler, is the father of Betty Hanscom, and he is the father of Vicky with Liz, then Liz and Betty Hanscom could be half sisters as well, which could also explain the resemblance. So this is always theoretical. We can always spitball ideas. Nina, do you have any theories?
No, not really. I just accept, the pronouncement that she was Elizabeth's daughter. I'm more consumed by incredible jealousy that Guy got to go to her house, because meeting her it's going to be that it's still one of the big regrets of my life that I never got to meet Joan, because she was my reason for getting into Dark Shadows, and I just loved her. And it was so funny, at the beginning you said, well, a lot of kids identified with David. Here I was, a 12-year-old girl, and I identified with a 56-year-old woman.
Yay. I love that.
We all have our regrets. I never got to meet my ultimate Grayson. I never got to meet Grayson, and I would have loved to have met Thayer too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
For me, meeting Jonathan was huge for me. I remember at the festival calling home and telling because as I've said, my mom was a huge fan too, and my mom actually got to meet Jonathan, and I'll mention how that came about in a second. But I called home from the 91 festival. I'm like, Mom, I just met Barnabas. I didn't just meet Jonathan Frid. I go, Mom, I just met Barnabas. So that was, like I said, in the spring of 91. And then in 1992, around Halloween, Jonathan was here in Aurora, Illinois, doing his one-man show. And I took my sister, my mom, and my friend Susan to see the show. And they all got a chance to meet Jonathan, which was really cool.
Oh, that's great. Wow, that's awesome. I got to meet him at Brown University when he did Fools and Fiends there in 1990. I think it was 1990. And that was amazing. He was incredible. I never got to meet Joan Bennett, but I did get her autograph because my 6th grade teacher, as a writing project, he would have us write to famous people and ask for their autographs, because he was an autograph collector. So we would ask for 2 autographs, one for his collection and one for us to keep. And he had this 2-volume book set called Who's Who in America. So I looked up all the Dark Shadows actors. I was trying to find them all in there, and I found Joan Bennett in there. So I sent the letter, and so I have Joan Bennett's autograph, although I never did get to meet her. I guess to close things out here, I want to ask you all, favorite Dark Shadows character and favorite Dark Shadows storyline, if you can choose just one, which I know is difficult to do. But
I'll go first. It's easy for me.
Okay.
Barnabas in 1897. I love Barnabas was the best, and I love the 1897 storyline.
Yeah. Okay. Guy?
Oh, me? My favorite character is Dr. Julia Hoffman. With a close second now, Mrs. Johnson.
Oh,
Mrs.
she's great.
Johnson was wonderful. It's like,
Yes.
and my favorite storyline was 1795.
Mhm.
And I have something I want to say after 9, if you don't mind.
Oh, please. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Nina.
Well, I have to, I mean, of course, Barnabas is everyone. I think everyone chooses him, but if I can add a second, it would have to be Liz Stoddard, because
Yeah.
she's the one who got me into the show, and I just loved watching her. There was just something I just couldn't get enough of it. And my favorite storyline, and I'm so ashamed to say I'm blanking on the year, but it was the one with Quentin and Quentin's theme in the Victrola. That is 18.
Oh, 1897.
Yeah.
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 Or the
Yes.
haunting, or when Quentin was a ghost.
Yes.
The
Yes.
Quentin's ghost storyline, the turn of the screw. Yeah. Yeah, that was yeah.
And Quentin's theme, that was my favorite, I guess.
Okay. Wonderful. Guy, what were you going to add?
I just wanted to say, you know, it's wonderful being here with Nina and you and Nina and Bob. And we have, you know, we've been so fortunate as to how involved we've been and meeting the different actors and everything. But you know what? It's a collective thing. I was just saying when we were talking about the Evans Cottage, if it weren't for a fan that maybe a lot of people don't know him, named Bill Branch, he's the one that found the cottage originally. One time the festival took 2 busloads of fans to Essex, and we thought that this one house was the Evans Cottage. So here are 2 busloads of people trudging up the hill and taking pictures of the house that turned out not to be the Evans Cottage.
Oh, no.
So what I'm saying is there's tons of fans that have not only influenced me, but been very integral in a lot of the stories that I'm telling.
Yeah.
There was one fan that figured out which episode it was where Louis Edmonds had gone up to his room to change. He thought his scenes were over, and they weren't, and he came down in his boxer shorts. And this fan figured out, I wish I could tell you his name right now, but I can't. So, you know, everybody has their part, and we all kind of fit together like a puzzle.
Yeah, yeah. And you can see.
Well, it's a family. Dark Shadows-Fandom is a family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I talked about this again in Our Shadowed Past. You know, I spent over now half of my life in Dark Shadows-Fandom. That night in Blockbuster Video changed my life forever. I mean, I was 31 at the time. I'm 63 now. And my life went a different, when I found Dark Shadows Family, you know, my fandom, my life just went in a different direction, you know? And I mean, it's crazy, but it's so cool.
Yeah.
Because this guy right here is one of my best friends. And, you know, one of his favorite characters is Peter Pan, and we all get to be Peter Pans. You know, I mean, we all get to live our childhood through Dark Shadows, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So,
and you can see the camaraderie at when everyone's together and having a good time, and just, I don't know, everybody's enthusiasm and just joy, and just people even meeting for the first time just strike up conversations and friendships right on the spot. It's just a really great thing to see and to be part of, and it's really, really cool so thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have any closing thoughts or anything else they want to add before I wrap things up?
Well, I'm just going to say, you know, Kathryn is strongly hinting that there is going to be another Dark Shadows series.
Mm-hmm.
You had Mark B. Perry, I believe, on one of your podcasts. Mm-hmm. And I, you know, just in the news last week, they were talking about this artificial intelligence program where the camera studies a person's face for half an hour. It can replicate that face exactly. I mean, it looks even more realistic than Princess Leia at the end of Rogue One. And they also have now something for the voice.
Yes.
If you have a recording of someone's voice. So, you know, whenever they restore Night of Dark Shadows, they're going to probably be able to use Grayson's real voice. So just think, if there is a new series, you theoretically you'll be able to have Jonathan Frid as Barnabas and Grace Hall as Dr. Julia Hoffman.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I hadn't thought of that when I talked to Darren Gross when I had him on here. I wish I had thought to mention that the creating, because you mentioned Star Wars. They've been doing that in those Star Wars series now too. Like was it the Obi-Wan Kenobi series? I thought it was James Earl Jones came back to voice Darth Vader, and it turns out no, they recreated that in a computer they synthesized his voice and wrote the dialogue, and it sounded like Darth Vader. And that was just incredible. So one never knows what the future holds. I know Mark is still, I heard from Mark recently. He's determined. I will say that.
And if that happens, that means there'll probably be more festivals.
Yeah, that would be great. It could mean a lot of great things for, I know some fans are resistant to any new Dark Shadows and like a sequel or a new reboot or anything. It's like, the way I look at it is it could only mean good things for the original Dark Shadows as well, because we could get more things like Night of Dark Shadows Restoration being released, things of that nature would be really cool. Plus, I have full confidence in what Mark is doing, because he is a hardcore fan his heart is in the right place, and he's very talented too. So and if Kathryn is giving her stamp of approval, maybe some of the original actors will come back too. Who knows? That would be cool to see Maggie Evans, what she's doing these days, and all of that. So yeah, definitely. All right, folks. Well, I want to thank my guests for joining me this evening. It has been an absolute delight to see them, and I look forward to seeing them again in person soon and having some good times. And for those who are listening, thank you for listening to the podcast and for supporting the podcast with your subscriptions and likes, and that means a lot to me. So if you do like this podcast, please do subscribe to it and rate and review it. That does help the podcast to grow. And most importantly, share it, spread it to other Dark Shadows fans, spread it like the dream curse to make sure that they are infected with terror at Collinwood.
Thank you for having us.
Oh my gosh, thank you for joining me.
And for as long as they lived, the Dark Shadows never truly vanished, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.